Greetings, listeners and viewers, in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. This is Paul Sandhu, and today I'm continuing my series on Bible history, rather, the history of creation that is recorded in the pages of the Bible. This history is a complete history in that it begins right at the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in which we read, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." I had a pause after the heaven because that is how, in the correct translation of the Bible, the wording is that in the beginning God created the heaven, comma, which is a pause, and then a new clause, and the earth. So this event was not a simultaneous event, that the heaven and the earth were not created simultaneously, or the heavens, which we know as the sun, moon, and the stars. They were not all created at the same time. There was a series. They had their origin in time, in sequentially, one after the other. First came the heaven, which is the city of God, as we read about in Psalm 46, for instance, from which God rules and reigns and administers and controls his creation. And I would emphasize it's his creation. And then while he was still in heaven, while only the heaven existed, God created intelligent beings and other creatures, I'm sure. But the two important races of intelligent creatures that were created, one were the angels, who are spirit. That is, they are not flesh and blood, although they do have form and they do have shape, but it is not like in the form of flesh and blood. And the other ones were called the sons of God. The sons of God, contrary to popular belief, were not angels, they were men. So today, as we continue this series, which began with the part one, Before Fallen Angels, the golden age of history, in which I showed that history of creation can be divided into different ages. And these different ages are based upon the events as well as the persons that were important in those ages. So in the golden age of history, we had a world, the beginning, and the world as we know it. It began not as we know it. These worlds were quite different than what we know today. But these worlds, as in terms of civilization, came into existence. Those first worlds, which were something like, the Atlantis of mythology, very advanced in their technology and very technical, that existed back, long time ago. So these worlds were first built in the Golden Age. See, before something can be destroyed, it has to be built. And the history of destruction is very easy to see. All over this earth, even today, we have ruins that show worlds that existed, some of them very fantastic in the sheer size of the construction, which shows us that they were not constructed by people of average size like we have today, or using technologies even that we have today. So there must have been worlds that existed that were created by a race that was at least technologically superior to even what we have in this day and age. So the Golden Age, beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, was a time when, these worlds were first built. And they built and grew, and the people and the populations, I'm sure, grew. So that's what the Golden Age happened during the Golden Age. And in that Golden Age, there was one creature in particular whom God had created, whose story we read in Ezekiel chapter 28, and which I covered in the part 3 of this series. So this will be part 4, actually. So part 1 was before fallen angels, the Golden Age of history. And then part 2 was before fallen angels, why some of the angels fell. And part 3 was after the angels fell, the Silver Age. Okay, so we have covered the time from the Golden Age to the beginning of the Silver Age. Today I will be continuing with the Silver Age. And as I just said, that I had begun relating the story of this person who was an angelic being called the anointed cherub, who is the father of evil. It is evil, sin, darkness, all the things that are classified as evil originated with this one character and the angels that followed him. Okay. And that happened at the end of the Golden Age. That's why the Golden Age came to an end, because in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 15, from which I have read, we read, Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. And then, it goes on to describe those things which God called iniquity or sin or evil. And I spoke about those things, particularly his one invention, let's say, that was the very root of all evil that existed back then and exists unto this very day, which was the invention of money, of the system of commerce, of buying, trading, and selling. That was all started by this angelic being. So after he turned to evil, the worlds that then existed, they began to be transformed slowly and over a period of time, from being worlds in which there was very high technology and which the people that existed, both the angels and the men, and I emphasize once again that the sons of God in the Bible, in the book of Genesis as well as the book of Job, they were flesh and blood creatures, very much like modern man, but they were not descended from Adam. They came before Adam, and yet they were not angels. That's what the Bible teaches. Okay, and there are many, many videos on my Bible history playlist on this subject. So if you haven't seen them, please go ahead and see them instead of writing comments, no, 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 they were angels. Go and see all the evidence that I have provided you before from the Bible that shows us that these creatures that were man-like, they were very much flesh and blood and also genetically compatible with modern man, with the man that exists on this earth today. They are genetically compatible, yet they are not of this race. They came before us, and they have existed since the very beginning of creation. So, in that age, when the system began to be transformed, the system was a system of God in the beginning, in which there was no buying or selling. It was everything God freely gave to all his creatures to use for their benefit and for their growth in knowledge and understanding. And that was one of the problems why evil came, because these people, some of these angels, and even some of these sons of God men, they became very knowledgeable. And as their knowledge grew, and as we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifies. They had only one of those two components. They had knowledge, but they did not have charity or love, because the knowledge of love had not yet come in God's creation. God had not yet been able to reveal his love for his creation, which would happen through the course of the ages, which is the very purpose of history, is for the Creator to reveal himself fully to his creation, so that they then can be transformed into his very nature, as we shall read soon from 2 Peter, where he tells us that we have to be partakers of the divine nature, and that could only happen if God gave us the knowledge of his nature. And that is why these ages were necessary, why history was necessary, why evil had to come, why death had to come, why sin had to come, why darkness had to come, is because they, in the end, would serve the purposes of God. As we read in the book of Romans, all things work together for them who love God, who are the called according to his purpose. So all things in the end, they are going to work together for good, okay, for God, because he has thus purposed it. And therefore, we need not have fear that there is something that has gone awry or something has gone wrong, that God's plans were not perfect. They have been very perfect right from the beginning. As we are told, He has made all things in wisdom. So He has foreknowledge of everything that was going to happen, including the fall of these angels, which happened. There was a certain day actually on which it happened, where we read that was perfect in that ways from the day that was created till iniquity was found in thee. So that iniquity which I began teaching on in the part 3 was first and foremost the invention of money. It was the creation of what the Bible calls Babylon. Babylon is a system. It's a system of money, of banking, of commerce, of trafficking, of trading, of buying and selling, essentially using money. Okay, that's what Babylon is in the Bible. And this is that creature, that angelic being, the anointed cherub, who began the system, which is with us to this very day. And as it was back then, to this very day, it is the root of all evil. Okay, when people have the love of money, they cannot have the love of God or the love of man in their hearts, and therefore they will resort to all manner of evil. Money is not just, dollar bills. Money is desiring things which are not rightfully theirs. Okay? And therefore, people who have that love in them, the greed for power, the greed for material things, which includes, the bodies of people as well, not just, cars or houses or something like that. It includes a desire to have control of people. Okay, so then they will do every manner of evil, and that is why the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. So we have to understand that money itself came somewhere, it began somewhere. It was not God who introduced money into His creation. So where did money come from? Where do these so-called corporations and all these, the world is run by, first and foremost, by banking corporations, and then by all these big multinational corporations and all governments, including the US government or the Canadian government or the British government, any government. They are merely servants of these corporate elites. And since it is spiritual power that controls them, that spiritual power has to have a priesthood. I'm digressing a little bit here, but that priesthood is housed in the Vatican, okay? And its roots go back thousands of years, right back to Nimrod and Babylon. All right, so I'm going to stop with this introduction into part 4 here, and we are going to continue our study of Ezekiel chapter 28, and then we shall see what do I mean by this, titling this The Wars of the Fallen Angels and Men. Zechariah Sitchin, the late Zechariah Sitchin, wrote some books. Okay, they were very, very misleading and misdirecting books, but that's okay. I just wanted to use the title of one of these books here that he wrote, called The Wars of Gods and Men, in which he speculated that at some point in time, there was these extraterrestrial creatures, he called them, that had wars between themselves, and that was the basis of that book. Now, as I said in my last part 3, that all fiction has a basis in truth. Okay, there is no such thing as pure fiction. Even the devil, though he is a liar, he can only lie about things that he knows that were at one time true. So he can only twist that which is true and bend it and shape it into a lie. Okay, so this story about the wars of gods and men, it is definitely has truth in it. But these are not wars of extraterrestrials. Well, some of them are extraterrestrials because, literally you could say that angels are extraterrestrial beings because they do not originate on this earth, and neither do they inhabit this earth as a rule. Okay, so there was a time at the end of the Silver Age, which is what transitioned it into the Bronze Age, was that these angelic beings, led by the anointed cherubs, they ended up having a war with, and this is God, okay? God uses evil empires, evil kings, against each other in the end to again fulfill his purposes. So these angels, they fought with these sons of God men who were led by a creature called Lucifer. And this is now we're going to begin to understand that in the Bible, the anointed cherub, who was an angelic being, and Lucifer, who was a son of God man, the Bible clearly identifies Lucifer as a man, are not the same creature. They are two different beings. Okay, we will study their story in a little bit more detail as we will come to that conclusion, as I have shown in the past, that there's no possible way that this guy from Ezekiel 28, this person from Ezekiel 28, and Lucifer from Isaiah chapter 14 are one and the same. They are not. But that's what happened at the end of that Silver Age, which is what brought us into the Bronze Age. Not us, I mean the people that then inhabited the world into the Bronze Age, was that there was this war. And these wars are also recorded in mythology. Mythology is fictionalized history. It is not to be trusted as complete truth, but we can learn a great deal of truth from it. And in Greek mythology, there is a story of the Titans, who were the first generation of gods, and they fought with the Olympians, the second generations, and the Olympians defeated them, and they imprisoned these Titans in a place called Tartarus, which in the Bible is called hell. So this story is that in this age, at the end of the Silver Age, these angels, they fought with these sons of God men. And why did they fight? Because evil is jealous. Evil is a lust that burns in a person's heart. So, although Lucifer was a protege of this anointed cherub angel, like Darth Vader in the Star Wars movies was a protege of the evil emperor, and he served the evil emperor, and Lucifer served this anointed cherub in the beginning by following him when he rebelled against God. Yet, in time, as Lucifer's power grew, he came to fancy himself as being more powerful than the angel and desired to be in that position of power and authority where that which was being held by that anointed cherub. Okay? Just like the anointed cherub wanted to put himself in the place of God. This Lucifer wanted to in turn, take over the position. It's like, whoever the new kid in the block is. If you have a football team and there's a veteran quarterback and there's a young guy in the wings waiting, he's waiting to, take over this veteran's position, okay, to show that he's better. And that's just the nature of evil. It becomes jealous, and in the end, friends become foes. So these two, who once were allies and friends, they in the end fought each other. And in this war, as again was purposed by God, it was the sons of God men that defeated these gods angels, or these angels who called themselves gods, and they imprisoned them in hell. And this was again God using one faction against another to serve his purposes. In in the book of 2 Peter, chapter 2, verse 4, we can read, God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Okay, in the Greek language, the word hell, the word that was translated hell in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, is the word Tartarus, which comes from the Greek word Tartaru. And Tartarus is the lowest regions of hell, in which allegedly the Olympians imprisoned the Titans. Okay, so these stories in mythology and in myths and legends of like generations of gods, this is very much in the Bible, which tells us about these different ages that have come and gone, in which different persons were prominent. As for example, in the Golden Age and the Silver Age, it was the angels that were prominent. And then we shall see in the Bronze Age, it was Lucifer, and then finally towards the end of the Bronze Age into the Iron Age now, it is Satan. So this idea that the Olympians imprisoned the Titans in Tartarus, it is not just like a story of fiction. It has a basis in truth. And the truth is that these Titans were like the angels, and the Olympians were like the Luciferian sons of God. And they battled, they fought, and in the end, it is the Luciferians who won, and they imprisoned these angels in hell in Tartarus, which is a region of the place called hell. You see, there are questions that Christians, people who read the Bible, they don't even ask. For one question would be subterranean regions of the earth, okay, whether they are submarine, which is under the waters, or subterranean, which is under the earth, these regions, which includes the place called hell. How did they come into existence? For what purpose were they built? Obviously, when God first built the earth in the Golden Age, these places did not exist, but eventually they did come into existence. So how and when? And these are related to the times when corruption had taken hold in God's creation and people began to envy and jealousy and all these other, these the works of the flesh, as they're called in the Bible, such as envy and strife and murders and reveling and idolatry and anger. All these things had become the norm rather than the exception. Then, of course, it led to wars between the different factions that existed in those days, and even the different races that existed, such, for example, the angels against the humans. So they did have these wars. And it is during these wars, like when we have a war on earth here, what do people do? They dig trenches, they dig other, they put the land to uses which are not normal, which are not like peacetime uses. So they dig tunnels, they dig all kinds of things under the earth and even under the waters. So that is, I believe, what happened is that it is as a result of these wars which spread and spread and spread. So that as we got towards the end of the Silver Age, these wars like had really wreaked a lot of havoc and destruction, and therefore a lot of these subterranean and submarine places had been built, including the place called Hell. And it is therefore in this place that these angels were imprisoned. But I do not believe that hell is a place that God created. God, of course, used it as he knew that he would, but it was a place that was dug up and created. All these subterranean worlds that exist today, I believe, were created and dug and built in the ages between the Silver and the Bronze Ages, so that today, as there is reams of evidence that our earth basically is very the amount of construction that has gone on beneath the surface of the earth, whether it's tunnels, whether it's like even like whole caverns or caves that are not just natural but also are man-made, we could say, or built by some race of creatures that inhabited this earth in the past. All these things happened in that time. Like if you remember in that movie Star Wars, in the first one, they had these when they went to actually battle and destroy this Death Star, they took off from an underground base. Okay, so these stories, underground military bases and underground prisons and dungeons, and all these are not just fictional stories. They do have a basis in truth, and I believe they came about as a result of these wars between these different races in the ages that came a long time before the present age. Okay, this story is very, very, very fantastic. It is more than any legend or myth or any kind of epic fiction story that a person can read or watch on the screen, such as The Lord of the Rings. These story, because it is real, that these events actually happen, it is more fantastic, and that is what gives credence to that saying that truth is stranger than fiction. It indeed is, but it is the truth that these things that did happen, and at the end, when that war was over, in which Lucifer defeated Lucifer, who is equated with Zeus in mythology. They defeated these angels, locked them up in prison of hell, and then Lucifer began, or Zeus became the supreme leader or the commander, like you might say, or the sovereign of that age. Okay, like the anointed cherub was the sovereign of the silver age, Lucifer became the sovereign of the Bronze Age, and he achieved that distinction by defeating these angels in these wars, and that is what brought us from the gold, silver age into the Bronze Age. Okay, so let's go back to Ezekiel chapter 12 and continue our study there, and then I'm going to go into Isaiah chapter 14 to show you that these two creatures, the anointed cherub and the Lucifer, they are not one and the same. And then we shall see what else happened during the time of the Silver Age, and what will happen in the Bronze Age, which I will cover in the next part of this series, because the Bronze Age, just as an introduction into the Bronze Age, is the time when all these events that a lot of people on the internet, they talk about these times of these Nephilim and about these hybrid creatures, and they say that these events happened in the days of Noah. No, these events did not happen in the days of Noah. They actually happened a long time before then. They happened in the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age was different than the gold and the silver in that it was in that age that they began earnestly to get into things such as creating genetic mutants. Okay, like you have these X-Men movies, these type of mutants and mythological gods with body parts of men and beasts, or beasts and beasts, and combined body parts of more than one species combined. They were all created in the Bronze Age, and they were created in the laboratories of Lucifer. They did not happen by sexual interaction. They happened through genetic manipulation and genetic experimentation. And it is the sheer scale on which this happened that is totally mind-boggling. And that's why we will read in Jeremiah chapter 4 that world in the end was destroyed by God when Lucifer attempted, just like that anointed cherub, attempted to ascend into heaven again to set himself up as God. That God brought that world to a crashing end, because the evil of that world, of that Bronze Age world, it far exceeded anything that happened in the Silver Age, and even some things that are happening today. The sheer abominable nature of that age, confirmed by the abominations that were created in that age, was so great that God tells us that he destroyed that world completely. The cities were broken down by the Lord and by his fierce anger. It was just unbelievable what happened in those days, yet it did happen, because the evidence of these abominations exist in our world unto this day, and they are still worshipped in many parts of the world as gods. But these gods, they were not the angels. The angels were imprisoned at the end of the Silver Age in hell. But these abominations that exist today, these are the abominations that were created in laboratories. They were flesh and blood. And eventually, when God destroyed those worlds, they became disembodied spirit. They lost their bodies, but they continue as disembodied spirits. These are the evil spirits of today. And that's where they had their origin, and that's where these gods of mythology had their origin, especially the gods that are hybrids. They are not like pure humans. These hybrid gods, they were created, they were manufactured, and in the end they were destroyed. But God has allowed them to continue their existence as disembodied spirits, again to fulfill his purposes, because evil was still needed But the days when this evil will be once and for all eliminated completely from God's creation, it is at hand with the second coming of Jesus Christ. But that's how long ago all these events happened, and that is what happened in those ages. And this we can understand from the Bible, that these ages did come and go, and they must have come and gone. One thing that was necessary before God would make Adam. Adam is that person, that flesh and blood creature from whom God Himself would take bodily form. That happened when Jesus Christ came in the flesh. That was God in the flesh. God incarnated Himself as man. But before that man, Adam, could be formed, one thing that was needed was the evil, absolute evil, pure evil, evil in which pure darkness, in which there is no light, must have come into existence. So the history of those ages, of the golden to the silver to the bronze, is the history of these ages in which evil was allowed to grow and mature and mature and grow and mature till it reached full age, till it became absolute, so that there was nothing whatsoever that was good left in it anymore. And that person in whom evil reached absolute state is Satan. Satan is the third part of this trinity of evil: the anointed cherub, Lucifer, and Satan. And Satan came into existence, I believe, in the Bronze Age, which I will talk about in the next video perhaps. All right, so going back to Ezekiel chapter 28. So the history of the ages, of the silver, the bronze, and the present Iron Age, it really is the history of evil, of the birth of evil, of the growth of evil, and eventually the demise of evil. It really is like a very fantastic epic movie that has played out, except that it is all real. As I've said in previous parts to this video and in many other videos on the subject that I have done, that evil serves the purpose of God. Okay, first of all, it served to show the power of God. As these powers that arose, first of all in the angels, then in Lucifer, and finally in Satan, and they were all defeated one by one by God, that revealed to all the rest of His creatures who were not chosen for the purpose of destruction, that, about His immense and infinite power. That really there is only one power in all creation, and that is the Creator. And every other power that it is that has arisen, it comes from Him. And unless it serves His purposes and is used for, beneficial or benevolent purposes, it will eventually be destroyed. And that is what happened. The angels were cast down, Lucifer was defeated, and Satan has been defeated, although he is still active. His time and his essentially, let's say, his free time is basically at an end, and he will soon go into the judgment that has been predetermined for him. Ultimately, the ultimate form of evil is death. And it is in defeating of death that God revealed to us the one power that He needed to show and to reveal to His creatures whom He loved, so that they too in turn could love Him. And that is the power of love. It is love that defeated death. God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. It is through love that death was defeated. It is because God loved that He was able to defeat death, which is the ultimate power of evil. Okay? And in so doing, He has shown us, He has demonstrated to us, He has revealed to us what love is, and therefore He is now able to transform us into that very same love that He is. That is the heart that He has now placed inside of us. In the very same book of Ezekiel, in a few chapters in Ezekiel 36, we can read, God said that I will give you a new heart, a heart of flesh. And in Deuteronomy, when Moses was speaking to the children of Israel, for those of you who don't know Bible history, you may want to go and start studying it. But this is the story of the Exodus and of the journeyings of the Israelites in the wilderness, when they came finally to the edge of the promised land, Moses spoke to them, and he said, in one as he was speaking, he was quoting God, who said that, oh, I wish that these people had a heart in them, that they would obey me and follow me, because this is for their own good. This is to save them from destruction. You see, God lamented the fact that they did not have a heart of flesh in them. But the question that arises is, if God is the creator, why did he not give them that heart? Well, the answer is that he did, except that it would have to happen as a process. And it is not until Jesus Christ came, died, and arose from the dead and demonstrated the power of love, that that same love could be replicated in the heart of his creatures, particularly the heart of man. Okay, that time when Moses spoke to the children of Israel on the banks of the Jordan River, 3,500 years ago or so, Jesus had not yet come, and evil still had not yet been conquered and defeated by love, and therefore that heart could not be replicated and reproduced in those people. And that is why God lamented the fact that they did not have a heart that would obey and follow him, and therefore they would have life rather than death. Therefore they would prosper and have peace rather than have a state of turmoil and torment that affected the nation of Israel all through their history, which is the story of the human race as well. That since we left the Garden of Eden, it has been a time of torment and of distress and of lack of peace rather than having the heart of peace. But thanks be to God, who did finish the work that he started out to do. He did allow evil to rise, but then he himself defeated it because of his immense and unconquerable love. Love never fails, and he showed that to us. And therefore, we have now come to understand that the only power that we need to desire is that of love. Because when we love, then that is the only way that we will not fail, just as God did not fail. Okay, he did not conquer death or evil by his immense power or destructive power, but he destroyed death by dying, okay, which he could only do because he loved. And that is the story, that it is evil arose in these ages. In the Silver Age, it began in the Silver Age, it grew in the Bronze Age, and it has reached absolute status in the Iron Age. And now, in the age to come, which is going to be the age of Jesus Christ, it will be destroyed once and forever. And in the process, God will have created for himself a whole race of beings who are love as he is love, and therefore they can relate to God as he relates to them, which is a relationship of love. And therefore, the purpose of which God started the process of creation will have been finished. And then we can get on with the business of living, which at the present time we are in the process of learning. So let me finish the story of the Silver Age in this part 4 of this Bible history series, which is the history of the ages that have come and gone since God began the creation in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay, in Ezekiel 28, we have read the story of the anointed cherub, who is the father and the originator of evil in God's creation. And in the previous parts of the series, I have explained why it was inevitable that he would turn to sin, because he was given a great deal of power, he was given a great deal of understanding, and power and knowledge without the knowledge of love, which it was not possible for God to give these creatures in that age. It'll always and invariably turn to evil. And that is exactly what happened with this creature. And of course, as he himself turned to darkness and sinned against God and rebelled against God, he convinced others. And one of the things about evil is that evil is very convincing and it is very enticing. And of course, he enticed and recruited others to his cause, so to speak, so that at least a great number of these angels of God, who were created in the beginning, called morning stars in Job chapter 38, they joined this anointed cherub. And then in the process of time, as we shall see, this evil spread. Not just the angels were given the domain or the dominion of the heavens. We can read about principalities and powers and dominions, and these are domiciled up in the heavens above the earth. And the earth he had given to the sons of men, as the Bible tells us. And these sons of men, in the ages past, they were those creatures known as the sons of God. So this earth was inhabited, the heavens were inhabited. In the heavens ruled the angels, on the earth, which was given to these sons of God, they were the home to these men. I don't know if they had rulers and thrones at that time in the golden age. I'm sure they did not, but they were on this earth, and they were flesh and blood creatures. And out of these flesh and blood creatures, some, not all, also turned and followed these angels. At that time, this separation between that we have currently between the world of the flesh and the world of the spirit did not exist. So these humans were very aware of the angels, and the angels, of course, were very aware of the humans. So it was not something that was hidden. It was the spirit world and the flesh world. They could communicate and I guess have sight of each other, just as we do today when we look outside and we see like things like a tree or an animal or something walking in the woods. They are visible to our eyes. At that time, the spirit world was visible. So now, in order to look into the spirit world, people need, either God has to give them a vision, or people go on these so-called vision quests, where they do things like take, drugs or ayahuasca and such things, and then they look into the spirit world and they communicate with spirits who, for the most part, are evil spirits, okay? Unless God gives you a vision, if people that go on these vision quests, this is just an aside, they are all interacting with spirits of devils or demons, evil creatures, not with the angels of God or with the Holy Spirit of God. They are not, okay? But in those days, these angels and humans, they had interaction with each other. And it was in the process of time that some of these humans, sons of gods, they were also following this anointed cherub. So let's quickly recap the story of this anointed cherub. And this shall bring us to the end of the Silver Age, so that we can move on to the next age, which is the Bronze Age, in which I will read the story of Lucifer from Isaiah chapter 14, which will probably be in the next video, which will be part 5. Okay, in Ezekiel chapter 28, beginning in verse 14, we read, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth." Actually, you know what? I should actually go back and read Ezekiel 28 from the beginning of the chapter rather than from verse 1, because there is a great deal that we shall learn about this anointed cherub and what system he set up, which is the system of Babylon. Okay, beginning in verse 1 in Ezekiel 28, we read, "The word of the Lord came unto me again unto me, saying, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tartarus." Okay, so as I have told you in the previous videos, Tyre was a merchant city, okay? It would be like in the present day, if the prophet Ezekiel was here, he would say, "Son of man," he would say unto the prince of Wall Street or the prince of the city of London or something. He wouldn't talk about the military or the political powers. He was talking about a banking corporate power, which is what Tyre was. "Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up." And this prince's heart was lifted up because the spirit that lived in him was the spirit of this anointed cherub. Okay, that spirit, although that anointed cherub himself is imprisoned in the depths of hell, in Tartarus, as I told you earlier, the spirit or the consciousness or the desires that were first, arose in him, they are very much being passed on to his protege Lucifer, and then through him to Satan. So Satan has the same motivations that motivated the evil motivations and the evil desires and the evil lusts that first arose in this anointed cherub. So therefore, the reason that this prince of Tyrus's heart was lifted up is the very same reasons that the heart of that anointed cherub was lifted up in the first place, became proud in the very first place. "Because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God. Okay, and this is exactly what that anointed cherub wanted. He wanted to be God rather than the creator who is God in reality. I am a God. I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. Yet thou art a man and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. See, Daniel, the prophet, had a great deal of wisdom. He was the wisest of all the men of Babylon. Okay, he was in Babylon, but he was wiser than all the soothsayers, all the magicians, all the priests, all of the educated men, the science people. He was wiser than all of them. Yet God is telling us in regards to this king of Tartarus that you are wiser than Daniel. And this was one of the problems with the anointed cherub, that he had been given a great deal of knowledge, and it was his knowledge that lifted his heart up, as happened to this king of Tyre. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel, there is no secret that they can hide from thee. With thy wisdom and thine understanding, thou hast gotten thee riches. So, what did this anointed cherub use his wisdom and knowledge for? As I said in part 3 to this series, that he invented money. Therefore, he began this process of accumulation of wealth. And what is wealth? Wealth is just material things. It could be gold, silver, it could be houses, cars, it could be, men, women, whatever. And it is just material things. Are those material things going to last forever? Of course not. Are we going to take them with us? Of course not. So it is a fool's errand. It is a foolish pursuit. But when lust gets a hold of a person, lust of money, the love of money, then accumulation of wealth becomes a primary goal of life. Okay? It becomes the purpose of life. And that is actually what happened to this angelic being. That's what he started to do, and that's what Satan does. Okay? With thy wisdom and with thine understanding thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures. What do we look up at all the rich and powerful people in this world? Why are they separate from all the rest? Because they have more material wealth. That's it. They have accumulated more things, whether it's dollar bills or stocks or bonds or gold or silver or houses or properties, whatever it is. That's why, and people look up to them. Why? Because that is what we have been taught is the purpose of life. We are right from birth. We are taught in this evil world that it is the love of money that is the purpose of life. And therefore, what do people do? They chase after money all their life. They run out and buy lottery tickets. If they look at somebody like Donald Trump, the billionaire, that's what they want to be like, without giving any thought to what kind of person he actually might be. And most people have no idea what kind of person he is. None of us do, unless you were close to him and you know him as you would know your spouse or something. And even then, a lot of people don't even know their own spouses. Okay. We don't know what the person he is. Just the fact that he has got money or he's got fame, like movie stars or something, or rock stars. People just want to be, they worship them as heroes and as idols. But that's what happened to this whole thing. Why people do these things, they originated with this anointed cherub, and his story is told in Ezekiel 28. And by comparing him to the king of Tyre, God pointed out that it is Babylon, money, it is banking, it is corporations and all these, corporate entities which become more valuable than human beings. That is what happens. That is what becomes the purpose and motivation of life when one looks inwards rather than looking upwards and outwards towards the Creator. When people start looking inside them, and the very first person that did that was this anointed cherub. He looked within himself. With thy wisdom and thine understanding, thou hast gotten thee riches, and thou hast gotten gold and silver into thy treasures, by thy great wisdom and by thy traffic. That word traffic, it is used in regards to this anointed cherub, but is not used in regards to Lucifer. As we shall see, Lucifer was a conqueror. He was a military general, unlike this anointed cherub, who was a banker. And he is the originator of banking, and that is why banking is, in this modern time in particular, it is so evil. The real banking, the banking that produces your money, that type of banking, not when you go into a bank and You take you deposit some money into account. That's a different type of banking. But the banking that actually creates money, which we are told is money when actually is nothing but paper or even digits in a computer these days, that type of banking is evil, and its origination lies with this anointed cherub. By thy wisdom and thy traffic again is buying and selling. But anything and everything from, whether it be a little newspaper all the way up to selling human trafficking. Okay, that's what the word is used, right? Human trafficking. Yes, it is a part of trading and buying and selling, commerce. By thy great wisdom and by thy traffic thou hast increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. And it is true. Rich people are very, very proud people. For the most part, they are, because they think that their money gives them special status, and it does. In this world, it does. It certainly does. It buys them privileges which are not available to the average person, and therefore they become proud. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast set thine heart as the heart of God, because ultimately God alone is the owner of everything, and he freely distributes and he freely shares. He's not like people that hoards all to himself. No, he has created everything to give it away, not to hold it all for himself. And then ultimately it all comes back to him, because it is all his. And this is what the heart of God did. And this guy sets his heart as God, that it all belongs to him, that it's all his, but it is not. Behold, therefore, I will bring strangers upon thee, the terrible of the nations. See, this is the story of these wars of gods and men. So God brought strangers, which is Lucifer and his people. They were his race. They were strangers to the race of angels, but God did raise them up, and eventually they battled. Like I told you, these battles with the Titans and the Olympians, which you read about in mythological history, which is a fictionalized form of history, and it is not to be trusted, but we can learn many things from it. Behold, therefore, I will bring strangers upon thee, the terrible of the nations, and they shall draw their swords against the beauty of thy wisdom, and they shall defile thy brightness. And again, the brightness is associated with this angel is, of course, his angels are creatures of light anyhow, but his brightness is also referring to his intelligence, because he was so intelligent that he began to think of himself as God. They shall bring thee down to the pit, which is what happened, did it not? The very bottom of the earth, Tartarus, the very bottom of hell. That's where he's locked away now. They shall bring thee down to the pit, and you shall die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the seas. Will you yet say before him that slayeth thee, I am God? Tyre, by the way, was destroyed very, very violently, and these things, they did happen. Okay, so what God had prophesied, it did come to pass, as in the natural world in the case of the king of Tyre, so in that age, in the case of this spirit creature, this angel, the anointed cherub. Will you yet say before him that slayeth thee, I am God? But you shall be a man, and no God in the hand of him that slayeth thee. Okay, and that is the power of death. Ultimately, death will come. Okay, for whether it's an angel or it is a man, evil will in the end destroy him. Okay, it will. Thou shalt die the deaths of the uncircumcised by the hands of strangers, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Okay, this is again the story of the king of Tyre from verse 1 to verse 10. And again, it is very comparable. The story is told here because it is going to lead into the story, the story of the evil of this king. It is going to lead to the greater story of the story of evil itself, which began in this anointed cherub. And this story begins in verse 12. In verse 11 we read, Moreover the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tartarus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. And now this story is the story of the angelic being, not of the human being that was the king of Tyre. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. So this again shows his nobility, his royal stature that God had given him. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of the tabrets and the pipes were prepared in the day that thou was created. And again, I had mentioned this here, but I won't go into it again about music. Music is a very powerful language, and it is a programming language. It can program people for healing, but it can also program them inside for destruction and torment and turmoil. Okay, so be careful with the music you listen to. It is going to have a very, even if it's a subconsciously, it is changing you. It is programming you. It is building force fields around your mind and heart that'll turn you away from God. Thou art the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. And verse 15, this in the Bible is the record of the origins of evil. This is where it began. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou was created. So again, that perfect in thy ways from the day that thou was created. This is the history of the golden age. From the beginning of creation, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. So that worlds that were created back then, they were created in perfection. They grew in perfection for a very long period of time, I'm sure, until all that God wanted these creatures to learn, they had learned. Their knowledge had increased to the point that God wanted it to increase, and increased sufficiently that this creature began to think of himself as God. And that all happened during the golden age. What that world must have been like, we will see when God makes the new heaven and the new earth, which I think will be even more fantastic than that one. But it is nothing like that has existed since then, and it won't until we get into the age where God creates the new heaven and the new earth. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou was created till iniquity was found in thee. By the multitude of thy merchandise, and again, like I said, this is the origin of this creature's sin. He became proud, and in order to exercise power as God does, he began the process of taking, because God had already given everything freely to everyone, and therefore the only way that they could exercise power was by taking rather than by giving. And for that purpose, he invented money. By the multitude of the merchandise, merchandising takes place through the medium of money, and that this is the origin of money and merchant banking and trading and trafficking and buying and selling, a system which is called the system of Babylon in the Bible, which will be the final judgment that will befall this world, in which all of this evil is now being concentrated. It is being removed from the heavens, and it is finally going to be all when Satan is cast down to the earth along with all of his evil spirits. Then all of the evil that exists in God's creation, it exists beyond the boundaries of this earth to the present time. It'll all be concentrated on this very earth. Okay? And it is here that God will finally judge it and bring it to an end. And that is the end of Babylon. The judgment of Babylon is fallen. Babylon is fallen. Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. We read in the book of Revelation. It'll happen. And that system of Babylon began back in those ages, God, gazillions, I don't know how many years ago, but multiple thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago. I'm not sure, but a very long time ago from today. By the multitude of the merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence. And again, I related to you the relationship between money and violence, and why it is the merchant bankers, the money merchants that are the high priests, the wizards of money that are the most violent people in this world. History has shown it from the beginning of history itself. And if you don't know the history of money and banking and how wars are all financed through bankers, then you should perhaps study a little bit of it on the internet. It is interesting history, but it is also real history. They have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God. This mountain is the holy mountain of God. It is reserved only for those who walk in holiness with him, which this anointed cherub did before he sinned. And therefore God said, I will cast him out, and he did, as profane out of the mountain of God. And I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. And again in 17 we look what happened to him as it happened to the king of Tyre. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings that they may behold thee. Okay, and this happened because as God brought, as in the case of the king of Tyre, God said that he would bring strangers upon him. God, at the same time, those very proteges of his, like Darth Vader turning against the evil emperor, Lucifer, who was a protege of this anointed cherub, learned everything he needed to learn from him, and then he turned against him. Okay, Lucifer himself became evil, and evil eventually, all that is left is envy and jealousy and desire to consume and devour everything. And what does God say? I will bring a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee. So this fire of lust that first arose in the anointed cherub, and I will show you like how we escape the corruption of lust and become partakers of the divine nature in a minute when I read to you from 2 Peter. But here we can read that the lust that began in him, the lust to be more than God had made him, to be not just more than God had made him, to be the desire, the lust to want to be God himself. Okay, that was the fire. Lust is a fire. It really burns inside people, and in the end, it is that very fire that devours them. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, it shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. And this did happen because one time this royal creature was known across God's creation as the highest of his created beings, and in the end, he was brought down to the earth in ashes by those very same creatures that had so adored him at one point in time. All they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more. And yes, that has happened. That in the end, no, I don't know how long it took. I'm sure this took a very long period of time from the day that iniquity was found in him until he began this system, okay, where he began the system of merchandising. The multitude, what does it tell us? By the multitude of your merchandise. It is not just a little bit. So he set up, like in this world today, we have, what do we have? Banking systems. We have corporations, multinational corporations and such. They did not arise overnight. They developed over a period of time. This is exactly how it happened in those ages that comes from the gold into the silver age. The beginning of the silver age, slowly they started implementing these systems, and these systems became more and more sophisticated. So by the time we got to the end of the silver age, banking and merchandising and corporations, they had taken hold of God's creation just as they have in this day. Okay? So that is what he did. He developed Babylon in that age. And in that Babylon, just like in today, you have multinational corporations, we have international banks, we have central banks. They are not all controlled by one person, okay? There are different people that all partake in that system, that play a role in it, in the creation of it, in the development of it, in the managing of it, in the administrating of it, and in the control of it. So too, in that time, this anointed cherub, although he was the head, he had his subordinates, both in the angelic realm and in the human realm, that worked with him to implement his systems, which God allowed to happen because it was going to serve his purposes. Okay? So they did that. And what did they do? The multitude of thy merchandise. So they made merchandising a form of life as it is today. What do people live for? What is making a living? It's earning money, right? It is getting involved in the system of commerce. Name one person that isn't. Even those of us who understand it, we are still involved in it. And that is what happened in those days, okay? These systems were implemented across God's creation, okay? And then the other thing that he did, which goes hand in hand with it, that with the love of money comes the worship of the self. So those who love money the most want to be worshipped the most. So what does he do in verse 18? He said, defile thy sanctuaries. He builds sanctuaries. Sanctuaries to whom? To the living God? No. Temples to whom? To God? No. To himself and to his other, those who followed him. They all set themselves up, okay, as the rulers, as gods, as creatures that needed to be worshipped, and therefore these sanctuaries, this religion of worshiping of the creation, about which we read in Romans chapter 1, that they worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator who was blessed forever. This began at that time. So that was the other thing that spread across God's creation, was the worship of the creature. Now that does not mean that everybody, all of God's creation, all God's angels followed him. No, they did not. And it does not also mean that all of the humans, the sons of God, followed him. No, they did not. But there was, I'm sure, a substantial number that did. Okay? And that's what happened. That's how God's creation from the golden age, which was an age of perfection in which, nobody was hoarding and nobody was accumulating wealth. They all shared and they lived for understanding and knowledge. That was transformed into the system of making a living, so to speak, where wealth and money and power became the desirable goals of existence rather than of knowledge and understanding and wisdom. That's what happened. And how did that come to an age? And that age came to an end when I believe there was these wars that arose. I also want to clarify here that although in the normal usage, the word lust is generally associated with sexual lust, in the Bible it means covetousness, or to desire something very, very strongly, whether that desire is justified or not. It is basically a desire that takes control of a person, whether it is the desire for another person, another man, a woman, or it is the desire for money, or for power, or for any other inordinate desire that takes a hold of a person. That is how the Bible classifies lust. War is an inevitable consequence of lust, as we read to you from the book of James in the part 3. Wars come through lust, the Bible tells us, and as these lusts built up in all of these creatures, not just in the anointed cherubs, but in all who followed him in whatever degree of power that they were able to exercise, of course, the lust to be number one, this is again where the origin of competition comes. When, Paul the Apostle was a very wise man, and he wrote to the Corinthians, he said, what are you guys competing amongst each other for? Why are you saying that one of, I am a follower of Paul, and I'm a follower of Apollos, and I'm a follower of, Cephas, and all these kind of things. He said, what are you guys, crazy? We are all people, we are all equals. And what is it that you have not received? Everything that you have received has come from God. So why this competition? This is also the origin of competition, people competing against each other, because lust will lead you to competition. Okay, the lust will bring you to a desire where you want to be number one, where you want to have all of the money in the world. Your greed becomes so great in people that, no matter how much money they have, how much power they have, how much wealth they have, they want more and more and more. And that's what all competitive sports and everything is based on, this principle. It's very evil. You should not watch competitive sports, okay? Don't get yourself involved in them, because there is a very sinister and evil spirit that rules over those kind of institutions, and you don't want to be partakers of those, okay? That is another thing that arose out of these things, is money, is merchandising, idol worshiping, sports, entertainment. All of these institutions, they have their history in Genesis, in the Silver Age, that they all began, they were perfected, and in the end, because so many people were involved in it, obvious jealousies and rivalries arose, And just like we have sports rivalries, you have nation rivalries, and you have kingdom rivalries that happened where these races, race rivalries, where one race is, rivals another. All these things have their origin in that time, and therefore it is natural to conclude that they all had wars between themselves. And in the end, it was the war between the angels and the sons of God, men led by Lucifer. And God gave power to Lucifer so that he would defeat these angels who had first arisen against them and imprison them all in hell. That is how the Silver Age came to an end, that these angelic creatures who first sinned against God were defeated and they were imprisoned. And therefore these stories, about which I've done many videos, where people tell you that the fallen angels came down in the times of Noah. No, these so-called fallen angels fell all the way down to hell a long time before Noah or Adam and any of us existed, and none of us have laid eyes on them, and none of us will until the day of judgment. So this brings us to the end of the Silver Age. The Silver Age was the age of the angels, and at the end they were no more. These fallen angels, the angels that sinned, they had been judged. They had not been judged, but they had been held for judgment and imprisoned in the very depths of hell. In part, before I go, actually, let me read to you from 2 Peter, okay? Because this is a great deal of understanding that we can gain here as far as what the Bible tells us, okay? In the book of 2 Peter, as to the purpose of creation, what does God want us to have? What does God want us to be? And what is the process by which we come to that goal, okay? In 2 Peter, beginning in verse 1, we read, Simon Peter, a servant and an apostle of Jesus Christ, to them that have obtained like precious faith with us through the righteousness of God and our Savior Jesus Christ. Grace and peace be multiplied to you through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. Okay, that's how grace and peace. You want grace and peace in your life? It comes through knowledge and understanding. Spend some time in the Bible. Study it. Don't just glance at it. Study it for yourself. Don't depend on your pastors or anybody else. You study for yourself. Study to show yourself approved unto God, and then grace and peace will not just come, it will be multiplied unto you. I love the word multiply, because God does not add to us a little bit here and there. He multiplies it to us, and we have exponential growth in us. According as a divine power. Now look at verse 3 here. In verse 3, according as his divine power has given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that has called us to glory and virtue, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. So what has God created us for? To be partakers of the divine nature. As God created us to be little, puny, flesh and blood, evil, jealous, filled with envy and hate men or mankind? Is that the nature that God wants us to be, to have? Of course not. He has made it possible for us to partake of the divine nature. People always talk about wanting to be God. Well, God has made it possible for you to be God. And you become God by partaking of the divine nature. But you don't make the rules. God tells you how you can do that, how it can happen to you. All right? It begins by having faith in Jesus Christ. That is where your journey will begin. If you want to be transformed from this person that you are, and most of us, can only need to look in the mirror to understand how rotten and corrupt we are. But that corruption that comes into us through this world through lust, and I told you the lust is built up in us from the very day we are born by our parents. What do they teach us? Oh, go get an education, make sure you make lots of money. And it is the love of money that is put into our heart right from the day we are born. Okay? So that corruption, we inherit that from our fathers, our parents, our teachers, or everything we see on TV, all the people that are set up as role models, oh, he's a big sportsman, he should be a role model. No, if you want a role model, there's only one, Jesus Christ. That's it. No man can be your role model, because if you do have some man as your role model, you are going to fail. Okay, so that corruption, it is works in us from the day we are born. But we can escape that corruption through the knowledge of God. Okay? By believing, by having faith in Him, by understanding, first of all, that there is a God who is a Savior, who is a giver, who has destined us to be partakers of His very own nature, who wants to transform us from these evil, corrupt, puny little creatures called man into God. That's what He wants us, so He can relate to us, so we can relate to Him. He doesn't want us a man-God relationship. He wants a God-God relationship. That's what He wants. And in order to have that, we have to have His nature. We have to be transformed into Him on the inside. And that's why He has given us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these we might be partakers of the divine nature. How many people are out there in the New Age movement claiming, oh, oh, I'm a god or I'm a goddess or whatever, No, you're not. You're just a rotten, corrupt human being. But you can be. If you will believe in Jesus Christ, then that transformation will begin in your heart. And I don't have the faith to believe in Him. Well, ask God. God will even give you the faith. All things come from Him, including the faith to believe in Him. That's how simple God has made it. He will even give you the faith to believe in Him. And once you do believe, then the secrets of knowledge and understanding will open up to you. Then the Bible will no longer be a sealed book for you. The seals will begin to be unsealed one by one, and you will grow. And then your growth is what? You are transformed. You're being transformed from a human being to a God being. That's how great that promise is, because in the end, God has created us to relate with Him, not on our level, but on His level. Therefore, He has to elevate us to His level. That's how great the purpose is that is at work here. But it can only be worked by first allowing us to become corrupt, and then by overriding that corruption by His love. That's how the knowledge of love comes to us, because it overwrites the evil in us. It is in comparison to that evil that we understand what love is. Therefore, evil had to come. All these things now, they make sense too. Don't they make sense? That whatever God has done, He has done it by reason and understanding and wisdom and a purpose. And you are a part of that purpose if you want to be, right? Don't just stay a man. Don't just stay like, flesh and blood, like corrupt and mortal. Seek that immortality. Seek that divine nature. God will freely give it to you without charging you a penny. His world is not based on merchandising and buying and selling. His is based on freely giving, and love gives. Evil takes, love gives. What does death do? It takes away your life. What does love do? It brings the dead back to life. Thank you for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.